It had been 6 cycles since the distress signal had been sent into the vast emptiness of space. 6 cycles since the small Cloran colony, built into what should have been a perfectly safe and quiet planet with no intelligent life, had come under attack by pirates intent on cleaning them out of their resources, leaving 2,000 of the peaceable beings destitute and starving. 6 cycles of screaming children, starvation, sleeplessness and fear, until finally something came for them. Delac almost wished she could wait a few more cycles. What descended on the panicked crowd was what could only be described as a prop from some horror film no self-respecting viewer would take seriously. It looked to be made primarily of thick, heavy plates of metal, bolted together to barely pass for a vacuum-sealed starfaring vessel. It belched fire that threatened, even after it had died out, to sear the fur from their famished bodies. It was a maddening construct of sharp lines and flat planes, and on its side was written 2 things, or more likely 1 thing in 2 languages. The first was a swoopy, sort of thick script that couldn't be read by any of the settlers here now, but the other was a simple script in galactic common. TCR Babylon. TCR, Terran Collated Republic, new calling card of a star cluster that was believed to hold no sentient life until recently, where deep in its recesses, nestled against a furious yellow star, was a ball of gravity and suffering that had produced the things of a slasher film director's most fevered dreams. Humans. Even the socially distant Clorans had heard of humans, how they had cowed the Clenifire with mere cinema, crushed them as easily as children in a war, not even a single tiles long. Giants that had sent the Pelfa slaving empire skittering to their holes with a stern look and thick stick, vicious murder-obsessed things that made a point to eat anything at least 1 time, just to prove they could be it sentient or not. And they were here. What for? Delac couldn't understand, couldn't comprehend what could possibly have lured the most dominant Deathworld race in the galaxy to this pitiful little barren rock. Though perhaps it had been the distress signal. Where other races saw a cry for help, had the humans picked up a signal for a buffet? It didn't seem likely, given the Clenifire, whom the humans had brought under their wing with a single altercation, deemed the Cloran so far beneath notice that they didn't even have a voice in the conglomerate of worlds, in spite of how prevalent they were in those worlds. Even the Chitin had deemed them no threat, so why were they here? While Delac was trying to figure these things out, the metal thing began to settle on the ground in clear view of the refugees. As she watched, a panel on its fore opened up, and what looked at this distance to be an inky blot on the vista emerged. There were several other blots, and as time passed, huge numbers of them emerged. The Cloran settlers didn't flee in the face of this, though they couldn't. This spot was the only one with atmospheric control enabled, as good as a cage from the moment the pirates had shown. As the crowd neared, Delac saw from her position at the forefront of the settlers what could only be humans. They ran the gamut of shades of brown, the one at the lead nearing solid black, while several behind neared almost comical white. Walking upright on 2 legs, they had 2 more limbs descending down, some of whose were the width of her whole sorry body. She spied with further terror a single member of the titular Clenifire, themselves one reduced to 3 arms instead of 4. The darkest human, arguably the largest as well, locked his roving oculars on hers and picked up his speed until he was standing, towering before her, and she only barely managed to get herself to look up at him from around the area of his middle. "My name is Captain Darius Flynn. I'm captain of the TCR Babylon. We received your distress signal and came as soon as we could." His voice was a deep timbre that she assumed would be the sound of 2 massive stones grinding together, and he was huge in nearly every part of his body. She picked up a distinct smell, which almost smelled like perfume or burning wood, that seemed to come from him, and his pitch-black oculars surrounded by white were latched onto her like a laser-guided weapon. Turning back the way he came, he gestured generally to the group and the ship behind him. "My crew here is going to help you get on board with our cargo bay empty. This frigate has space to spare for all of you. We also secured emergency rations on the way, and the nearby Fell system has agreed to house you. Do you have any injured?" "You're going to help us?" she asked breathlessly, unsure of her very existence in the shock. "Aye." He nodded. "To the best of our ability, and why say it like it was so natural? How many other races would come out of their way for something like stranded Chlorans? How many Deathworlders would even take note of them? I am Dalak, formerly the settlement's chiefess, and I speak for my people." Her relatively minor training as a diplomat took over and helped her muddle through her confusion. "We have few injured, but we have not eaten in many cycles. The young are susceptible to starve." The human, Captain Darras, lowered himself so they could speak at a closer level, almost as one would to an equal. Holding her gaze, the captain said firmly, "Not on my watch, they won't." Standing back up, he gestured behind him and a chi tin emerged from his massive shadow. "Greetings, Chieftess," it said in its chittering voice, highly welcome compared to the buffeting sound of the human. "I am Thrustillion Tuck, the ship's operator. I will be your liaison during the evacuation and am authorized to requisition items on your behalf within reason. A waste, if ever there was one," scoffed the Clenifier, even as they picked up 3 of her people like luggage in her massively strong arms. "I do not know why we must divert for the sake of these rodents. Kissy, our employment contracts include clauses regarding aid. All human vessels operating legally are required to provide humanitarian support in times of need. The captain's hands are bound." "Make no mistake, Thruss," came that roiling voice again. "We'd be here to help, clause or no clause, and anyone who doesn't agree can stay here." He aimed a hard glare at the Clenifier, and she withered instantly, scurrying off to deliver her squirming payload. But Dalak still couldn't grasp what was happening. "Why?" The captain only looked at her and sighed, leaving the question unanswered until another, paler human spoke up, lifting an injured refugee bed and all. "We're Marines, ma'am. First in, always. I'm afraid we cannot do very much for your people in the way of privacy," said Thursdays. "This space was designed to hold interplanetary freight. Its size is the only reason you can fit, but that also means there will be no walls. That said, while you may not wander the ship randomly on the captain's orders, the human defecation chairs are available for your use should you need to relieve yourselves, and there will be several crewmates assigned at any time to help you and your people." Dalak smiled wearily, but gratefully at the chitin, her own 2 little ones squirming under her forelimbs. It was incredible how fast a couple squirts of the nutritional paste they'd been provided could take the children from near death to wiggling ragamuffins. "Thank you dearly, Thruss, and I will ask my people to do their very best not to be a bother to the crew, though I'm afraid I've no control over the wiles of toddlers." She raised the wiggling fanny of her youngest as it tried to escape. He chuckled good-naturedly. "Do any? Be well, Dalak, and stay safe." He gave a small bow and retired to his quarters, carefully avoiding the piles of resting bodies laying about. Dalak and her people, following the near-full cycle required to get them boarded, treated and gratefully fed, had been lead into what would be their communal quarters for the duration of the trip. It was not dissimilar from the outside of the vessel, though notably cleaner, thankfully, insomuch as it was a massive space of metal plates riveted and welded together in what had to be a show of stubbornness towards a galaxy that primarily used various forms of silicates and superplastics, nervous in what could only be described as a giant cage, being guarded by the predators who owned it, Dalak could not help but feel jittery and uneasy in spite of her rescue. This was a sentiment apparently shared by many. Everywhere she looked there were the sparkles of open eyes marking her passage and warily eyeing the human guardians that had shown them such confusing kindness, too terrified of their rescuers to sleep in spite of their overwhelming exhaustion. They'd all heard the stories, of course, and having seen the things in person did nothing to assuage fears the captain and his human crew could lift entire families over their heads with ease. And it wasn't hard to imagine those same life-saving limbs squeezing the guts from them like prey. It didn't help that this place was so unbearably hot Cloran gravitated to cold, and this storage facility was kept at a sweltering temperature, which according to Thruss had been actually lowered to its limiter to allow for them. "Ma, ma!" came an insistence under her arm. "Hot!" cooed her eldest Cly, which her youngest Flo was quick to mimic. Dalak bit back any attempts to scold them. She'd come so near to losing them. Perhaps she was afraid any harsh words would be her last to her offspring. "I know, lovies, I know." Trying to comfort them, she bounced them a bit, but to no avail, for every adjustment resulted in a rump being pointed at her somehow. "But we need to sleep now, please, please, try to bear it for a little while." "But hot." "I know, I know." Dalak, having reached her spot in the area, laid her children down and swaddled them in their blankets to keep them from escaping, and slowly eased herself down beside to try and maybe get a bit of rest. It proved for naught, though. Her dreams were filled with brawny brown skin and crushing white teeth. She saw her babies fall down the gullet of Captain Darius, all the while he told her he was here to help. Scream as she like, no sound would come. She ran to the Clenifer army that appeared behind her, only for them to cower and whimper, humans emerging in their ranks to rip off the arms of any who got in the way of their meal. Weep and quiver. That was all she could do as Captain Darius swallowed Cly, as he swallowed Flo, as he reached down for her, picked her up and hung her over his gaping maw. Then he swallowed Dalak! Ripped from her fever dream, sweating for more than just the horrid heat, Dalak found herself snout to snout with Brune, one of the other Cloran mothers. "What, Brune? What in the world is— Where are the children?" she asked, not demanding an answer so much as begging for one. Her heart sinking, Dalak came to a full, panicked consciousness as she whipped about, finding a pair of empty swaddling blankets in the spot where there should have been children. "You haven't seen them either." "What did the guards say?" "How in the galaxy am I supposed to talk to those monsters? For all we know, they're the ones who took them." Dalak had to fight every instinct that was telling her to agree, fight for an argument. "They are many things. Silent is not one. Do you mean to tell me they strutted in here and abducted our little ones without a single eye spotting one?" Brune fell silent, unsure of how to respond. How could she? She had been among those assigned to secretly watch the Watchers, though the humans seemed to gather the intent behind having so many eyes on them. "Bah, fine, I'll go ask." Dalak leapt up and made a beeline for the nearest human guard. Tall, like all the others, he had pale yellow hair and gemstone-like green eyes. "Human, sir?" she asked. "Ma'am," he answered quickly, and from his tone she could tell he knew something was amiss, but had hesitated to simply put himself in the midst of it. "Is something wrong?" "Yes. Several of our young have disappeared," she said gravely. "Have you seen them?" "I'm sorry, but no, y'all are pretty small by our standards, so I'm ashamed to say they may have slipped by." He bowed his head in seeming shame, then lowered himself so he could speak to her better, just like the captain had done previously. "I'll call up to the COB, let them know we got some little ones out and about on the ship. We'll have all hands on search duty, promise." "Oh, thank you very much, but—" She was hesitant to send a horde of super predators after hers and others' children. Who knew what could happen? The humans seemed to gather this, then made another suggestion. "I guess having a bunch of strangers stomping around might be less productive than we might hope. If I tell everyone to keep an eye out, then give you permission to go after them yourself, would that work?" he asked. "Oh my, yes. Thank you so much." The human's mouth curled up in some sort of show, and he said, "No problem, ma'am. Skipper's responsible for anyone who steps on the boat, and that includes refugees." He returned to the standing position and retreated to the guard post that had been established, presumably to make the call he'd promised. Dalak likewise retreated, rejoining her brothers and sisters in worry to tell them what had been agreed upon. "Just you?" asked one of the mothers. "No, I don't think so, but let's keep search parties as small as possible, best case scenario. The children are just restless after being on that sorry rock for so long. If we show up en masse, we may just scare them off." A chorus of nods, and Dalak started divvying out teams of 3. "Ma'am, I've got permission from Cobb. You and yours can search the ship, but if you need access to anything, you need to ask a crew member." Skipper had returned from his call, smoothly entering her circle, and being frighteningly quiet about it. She couldn't help but notice just how many advantages does a race need. "Cobby says they may have gotten through the vents and access panels, but there's no way they're able to get very far that way. They have to have exited somewhere nearby. Do you have any idea what they might be up to?" "I might," offered a mother, and Dalek thought she knew where she might have been going. "My girls were complaining about the heat. They may have gone in search of somewhere cooler." Nearly all the parents nodded in agreement, Dalek included. Skipper brought a hand to his chin and nodded thoughtfully. "All right, that narrows it down 4 wards. There would be the captain's mess and coolant drums. Aft wards, there's the crew mess, water chillers, and Janice's pub. Get a team for each, and I'll let them know you're on your way." Dalak thanked him profusely and set the teams down their paths, herself heading afterwards with Brune and Han. Skipper led the way to their first location, the so-called crew mess. With a loud thumping on the metal door, utilizing strength that would likely crush any one of the mothers present with even half of itself, Skipper called out to another human, "Cod, you in there? Come on, Cod. I know your ass ain't asleep. Open the damn door." From the other side of the metal barrier, Dalak heard the huffing and hawing of the other human as they tried to answer the call. With another thump and a round of cussing, the titular Cod opened the door. This human was shorter than Skipper, with hair down their back and a softer appearance overall. This one had a narrower chin and no facial hair like many of the others had, leading Dalak to believe this was a rare example of a female human. As a matter of fact, she seemed rather attractive to Dalek, or at least would have were it not for the obvious scar that marred her face, changing its colour from a reddish-pocked brown to angry pink along her mouth. Cod didn't seem too terribly happy about the awakening either. "Lance, you prick! Do you realize you almost made me drop an entire box of salt into tomorrow's soup? Were you going to eat it if I did?" "No time for the usual back-and-forth, Cod, so let's skip the schmoozing and get to the sweet nothings." Skipper's response was quick and terse, seeming to clue Cod into the seriousness of the situation. "These little ladies here are out a gaggle of kids." He gestured down to Dalak and her company, to which Cod gave a surprised jump. "And think they may have been looking for somewhere to cool off. I need you to show them the fridge and freezer." "Huh? No way, no how," declared Cod, to the sinking fear of the Chloran mothers. "They don't even make nets for that much hair. You expect me to brush every hunk of meat I take out from now on?" "No buts, Cod," refuted Skipper. You'll open the door for them. You don't have to let them in necessarily. Just make sure nothing snuck in while you were focused on your salt." Cod rubbed the back of her head, sighing in exasperation, mulling it over for a painful amount of time. "Sigh, yeah, Lance, all right. I'll show 'em in." Cod looked down to Dalak and her posse and jerked her head into the room, making way for them to file in. As they went inside, Skipper said his farewells and returned to his duty guarding the group, and Cod took up point and led them further inside. "Did you hear that?" whispered Brune. "Salt! She was poisoning the food the whole crew eats and says it like it's nothing. What if the children got into something like that?" "I'm more worried about the other thing," muttered Han. Perhaps sensing their discomfort, Cod made an effort to put them at ease, though was clearly lacking the skill for it. Sorry. About earlier saying you can't come in and all. Wasn't that I don't want you to find them, it's just cleanliness is a big part of my job. And you look like mice, so." "What's a mice?" asked Han. "Animal from Earth, you look just like 'em, just a few shades bigger and a few more shades better dressed." "Oh? And what role do these creatures serve on Earth?" "None. Really just vermin, ops." Realizing too late that she'd compared 3 intelligent beings to the sort of creature to be exterminated on sight, Cod turned to apologize, only to find all 3 rooted in place and Han and Brune cowering behind Dalak. "I didn't mean you were ones," she hurriedly explained. "Just that you look kinda similar. You can talk and wear clothes and such, so's you got nothing to worry about from me, swear. Except you just admitted that we look like something you normally wouldn't hesitate to murder. What a terrifying race." "It's fine. I think, can we just find the children?" Dalak eked out. "Far sight better than letting me talk, tell you what," grumbled Cod. She continued to lead them in and behind the large metal counter and into what looked like the most secure vault a bank could buy. "My word, I thought this place a kitchen," exclaimed Brune. "What valuables could possibly warrant such a door? And what sort of punishment would sneaky children who found their way inside get?" Dalak added in secret. Cod, though, bared her teeth, not noticing the flinch of terror that ran through her guests. "Ladies, you're on a naval vessel. What's in this room is more valuable here than any gold, jewel, or Playboy magazine in the universe." And without further ado, Cod yanked the door open, clearly utilizing the whole of her body to swing the massive lump of metal into a position that would allow them to pass. All 3 were hit with a blast of air, so cold it stood in shock of their previous toastiness, the very air turning to white vapor in the sharp contrast. Within was the treasure in question. Tubs of colorful stuffs that looked to weigh roughly the same as Dalak herself. "Ice cream," finished Cod. The 3 guests stood in awe of the room, relatively small, packed to the ceiling with what had been described to them as the greatest treasure humanity had for its shipping vessels. Eyes wide, they basked in the unexpected cold and the unexpected honor. "Yeah," said Cod, rubbing a manipulating digit under her ocular. "I get like that when I see it too." After a moment for herself to appreciate as well, Cod stepped in front of the group. "You all wait here. I'll check about." She made to turn around and enter the room, but stopped herself with a realization. "Actually, while I'm in there, you'll check around out here. I don't see how something so little could get inside, but the wall and door are plenty chilly themselves, so they may have snuggled up out here." Her piece said, Cod entered the chamber, while Dalak, Han and Brune did as suggested and checked the perimeter. After a few short moments, "Here!" cried Brune, prompting Dalak and Han to come running. There, nestled in a bundle behind some boxes, braced against the wall in a pile, were 5 of the missing children. "Find 'em?" asked Cod, running back out with swift, thumping steps. Unfortunately, the yelling and heavy footsteps of the human alerted the children, all of them awaking at once to gawk at her. Cod had made it closer than Dalak had, and from the opposite side, so Dalak got a perfect view of Cod glancing down to the children, only to watch in wonder as the human froze in place staring at the children, and her skin turned visibly pale. That little sound was all it took for the children. Like the little hellions they were, all five bolted, trying to get away from their mothers so hard they managed to rush straight for poor Cod. Cod, for her part, went ramrod straight. Then, trying to backpedal away from the children, tripped and fell flat on her rump. Han and Brune, though, had no such issues. "Last one to stand before me gets a whipping like they'd never believe," Brune yelled as loud as she could, and Han pulled a switch out of nowhere and swished it about, eliciting a terrible noise in its wake. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like the mice they so resembled, several of the children scurried over and stood obediently before their mothers, heads down and shivering in fear. Dalak, noting with anxiety that this wasn't anywhere close to all of them and that neither of her own were present, went to Cod, who hadn't moved from where she fell and was still white as a sheet. "Are you okay, dear?" asked Dalak. "Fine, just... God, it were like being back in New York." Dalak, unsure what to do, simply reached out and patted the giant on a now reachable shoulder. Just then, "Ah!" A high-pitched scream cried out from the cold storage box that Cod had left open behind her, repeating every few breaths. Dalak and Brune bolted while Han stayed with the captured children. Dalak could hear the human getting up behind her, even as she scurried to the source of the screaming. Into the comfortably frigid box, past the towering sacred ice cream, and into a side corridor she hadn't been able to see from the outside, Dalak pursued the sounds of the wailing child. Catching sight of the little girl, she leapt in and covered her with herself, covering her eyes and pressing her to her breast to protect the poor thing from whatever had terrified her, so only to look up and wish someone would do the same for her. "Fucking meat locker," came the grumble of resignation somewhere to the rear. Hanging all around her, suspended from hooks and torn bare of skin and guts, were rows and rows of carcasses and severed limbs, their macabre swaying, caused by all the rushing about seeming to indicate a lingering sense of life to the things. In jittering fear, Dalak turned her head to her rear, to Cod. Cod, a difficult expression on her face, had blocked Brune from entering and seeing the terrible scene there for herself. Her breath crystallizing in the air, Cod stepped in after Dalak and the child, still whimpering in her arms. That's right, Cod was a human, a predator, the most dominant predator on a planet full of them, a being so inherently powerful that even its weakest member had earned the title Death Race almost as soon as they'd been discovered. Dalak had nowhere she could run from this being, this thing, nowhere that would protect her and the child in her arms from its merest whim. Cod came over them then, her long limbs seeming like the bars of a cage, and she bent down to enwrap them. Dalak did the only thing she could think of as soon as one of the limbs entered her field of vision. She snapped out with her teeth and bit it. There was a jerk as Cod attempted to remove her limb for a moment, the brief strength of which threatened to snap Dalek's neck as she refused to let go, only for the withdrawal to cease. In her teeth, Dalek could feel the power flowing through the woman Dalek had barely broken skin, the corded, hardened muscles repelling her completely, and she could feel every twitch Cod made threatened to rip her teeth out. Cod knelt down and began stroking Dalek's cranial fur, the slow, smooth stroke somehow comforting. Dalek didn't let go her bite, but she did let go her restraint and began to cry in confusion and fear. Amidst this confusion, Cod knelt down and with her other arm scooped up Dalek and her charge in one single go, holding them like Dalek might one of her children. She extricated her arm from Dalek's mouth and, still making sure Brune didn't see, either exited the meat locker, then the freezer altogether. It took a few moments for Dalek to finally calm down, during which she allowed herself to be held by the most powerful being she'd ever known, from whom this fear had sprouted. "You gotta understand," Cod whispered. "Humans gotta eat meat, can't survive elsewise. There was a point where we tried as many alternatives as we could think of, but biology can't be beat. But please remember, we ain't monsters either. We're thinking just like you, and wouldn't dream of eating anything that thinks, feels, or talks. Them's just rations from our home planet. We ain't mean you no harm, and every single one of you is going to make it to Fel if I got anything to say on the matter. Just like Captain Darius. But why? Something like that is the norm for them, so why should it matter where the meat they need comes from?" "Sorry," whispered Dalek. "Sorry, sorry." It took nearly a half hour for both Dalek and the girl to calm down, during which Cod bandaged her arm. Dalek made it clear she would accept any consequence for the injury, but Cod said it was no issue, and she didn't blame her. It took some time to explain the concept of animal farming and cold storage, but both Dalek and the girl eventually were made to understand that none of them or their families would ever be in danger of being hung up on those hooks. Brune and Han gathered up the children and returned to the group. Dalek insisted on continuing on to find any more. "Good news! There won't be any more meat lockers for you or them to stumble into," Cod said after it was decided she would take Dalek to her next location. "Bad news. Not even Lance can get you into the water coolers. It's a controlled room, and only designated personnel can get inside." Dalek felt herself droop at this bit of information. "Sorry, but we gotta leave that one to the boys, though it's really unlikely any of them squirts of yours got in there. I'll get you to Janice, though I can't really help past that. Got a crew of about 150 to feed on tomorrow's shift, and I'm behind as it is." Dalek expressed her understanding and allowed herself to be led to the place in question. It was a fair ways further into the ship, down and then up several flights of stairs, and they even found one or two children napping under a sea units on the way, but eventually they made it to what Skipper had called Janice's pub. Cod knocked on the door and bade her farewells, departing just in time for the automatic door to open. "Come in," said another human voice. Following the sound, wary of any shocks like the ones she'd received spending time with Cod, Dalek made her way inside, immediately shocked by the chilliness of the room. As she entered, the first thing she saw was the children. Indeed, the remaining 20 or so missing children of every age were sleeping soundly in the room, splayed about on tables, counters and chairs. And at the far end, there was another human, though this one was different than the rest. Whereas every other human Dalek had met had been brimming with strength and vitality, the female seated across from her seemed diminished somehow. Her hair was pale and faded into grey. Her skin seemed pallid and hung loosely in spots. The only thing that Dalek could be sure was the same were the eyes every human she'd met so far had had a sort of inner strength that radiated from within through their eyes. The corners of her mouth pulled into the same ones Skipper had made before. "Welcome, dearie. I've been expecting you for some time now." Shocked out of her staring, Dalek quickly introduced herself. "Ah, so you are little Clee and Flo's mother, are you?" she asked. And the names of her children made her realize that the rascals in question were lounging comfortably on the woman's lap. Immediately embarrassed, Dalek began apologizing and rushing to take them from her. "Oh, it's no trouble, really. I've had several little ones of my own over the years, so I know the terror of a toddler in a fit." Even still, Dalak couldn't help but worry. Even this frail example of humanity could have crushed her children at any time, and there would have been nothing anyone could do to stop it. Accepting the girls from the woman, Dalak breathed a sigh of relief as soon as her babies were back in her arms. "My, that trying was it?" asked the woman, Janice apparently. "Yes, for many reasons." One can't help but picture the worst when their child is in the custody of a monster after all. Alarmed she'd let her inner feelings show, Dalak made to apologize and hopefully correct her, but Janice was apparently not offended in the least. "Oh, no need to apologize. You're right after all, about us." Shocked at the admission, Dalak readied herself to flee. "Now don't get me wrong, I'd never eat you. Nor would I suffer harm to come to any of these little dearies, precious as they are, but we are predators, vicious Deathworlders through and through." I don't understand." Well, a predator isn't necessarily a wild beast, is it? Humans are creatures of strength and violence, and we're admittedly quick to anger, but no being in the universe can stay ornery all the time, yes? I think what you've allowed yourself to get hung up on is what we can do, not what we would do. Tell me, have any of the human crew members threatened you? Have they made any attempt to harm you? No. As a matter of fact, Dalak had to admit the humans were the most gentle, kind, and accommodating people she'd ever interacted with. "That would be a matter of humanity," Janice offered. "Please remember, everyone on this ship is human, excepting some of our Xeno associates, but we don't define our humanity by our physical capabilities. There are deformed and crippled humans with as much right to the title as our hale and hearty captain. What we can do, the violence we are capable of, is what qualifies us as vicious Deathworld things, but we define our humanity by the choices we make." For instance, she reached down and gently rubbed the head of a sleeping child, coaxing back to slumber as it threatened to awake due to their conversation. Smiling at the young one, she stood and nimbly stepped over them to get an object from the back of the room, a large padded cart. What it could be used for, Dalak couldn't guess, but she also couldn't be happier to see it. As she began piling the children into it comfortably with Dalak's help, she continued on. "There is not a man or woman on this ship that will hesitate to offer their life for that of your children, myself included. It is a similar thing that drove this frigate to abandon its cargo and pick all of you up. In spite of the loss to profit, humanity is something we demand of each other, not something all of us are necessarily born with." With the last child secured in the cart, Janice began pushing the ridiculous trolley out the door and into the hallway. The children, by the way, were very vocal about all this. "That's why I thought it important to discuss with you." Of course they were. As they made their way back down the hallway, picking up kids and adding them to the litter as they went, Dalak and Janice continued to speak more comfortably and openly than they had at the beginning. Janice explained that the reason so many kids wound up with her was because her room was a research center. It was temperature-controlled and maintained at a very chilly temperature for the sake of the volatile chemicals she needed to work with in her attempts to adapt human biological defense mechanisms to xenodiseases and environments. She'd found the children wandering about aimlessly, and she'd recognized the signs of heat exhaustion, so she'd piled them up and rushed them to the room for their health. For her part, Dalak discussed some of what her people had been through, and Janice likened them to a culture from Earth, known as gypsies, wanderers with poor reputations, but a strong culture. She said that most humans would likely like them quite well, as a matter of fact, and suggested her people seek a partnership. Dallak was surprised to learn that not only was Skipper Cod's husband, but Cod was also Janice's daughter, and that she had a little girl of her own somewhere on the ship. Dallak sighed. "I'm very sorry about all this. To think so many would find their way to you." Janice smiled gently and continued to speak. "Oh, it's fine, we aren't particularly well equipped, and my work is at a standstill anyway, so if anyone needs a break, do feel free to bring them by. As a matter of fact, I'll talk to the captain about having my room serve as a nursery for the duration of your stay." Having finally arrived at the storage room housing her people, Dallak had the parents come over and collect their kids so Janice could return to her room and get some sleep herself. Before leaving, though, she offered one last word of advice. "It might help you if you don't think of yourself being trapped by Deathworlders, but in the protection of humans. If it helps." Dallak sighed. Her stress and fear finally gone for the first time since she'd woken up that morning. 6. No, it was past 7 cycles now, wasn't it? "Yes, I think it does. Thank you for everything." So that's what it was, Dallak thought as she carried her kids back to their blankets, laying down for what was sure to be restful sleep. That's what I didn't get. It's what the captain was talking about and why they all treat us so well. They're not just Deathworld things. They're humans.